use the word moderating, in discussion with a very special guest for you here today, Saudi Arabia's Foreign Minister, Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud. And I want to sort of bookend this conversation by placing it within sort of the lens of Vision 2030, where Saudi Arabia is today, what is going on in your file, and close with where you hope we are headed 5 years from now and beyond. Let's start with today. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Good. I hope you'll feel like that at the end of this conversation.
I'm sure I will.
Saudi Arabia's #1 priority today, and this will be absolutely no surprise that I will say this to this audience gathered here, is the implementation of Vision 2030. Midway through, we are already witnessing huge societal and economic change here, and an increasingly influential role on the global stage. The primary task of your file, sir, the Kingdom's foreign policy, is to enable that vision by reducing threats posed to Saudi Arabia's economic success by instability or conflict in the region, amongst other things. But let's start there. Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely. That's the primary mandate of myself and my ministry. It is to protect Vision 2030, to protect Saudi Arabia's pathway to prosperity. But not only that, it's also part of our mandate to enable everything we're trying to do in the kingdom under Vision 2030. So whether it's enabling our colleagues in the various other parts of the government to reach out to the world and making sure that they are able to engage with the world in a positive and proactive way, whether it's making sure that our relationships are serving the joint interests, the interests of the kingdom and of our partners. So it goes well beyond just protecting the kingdom's stability and protecting our neighborhood stability. It's also really an enabling function for all of the economic elements of what we're trying to do.
Well, given that, what's been the impact to date, to your mind, of the regional conflicts that we see today, and your assessment of the risk of a spillover should these conflicts further escalate?
So I would say there, of course, has been an impact. We've seen the Red Sea, other things, but the overreaching impression that I have and that most people that I talk to have is that actually we have shown ourselves, especially in the kingdom, but also in the GCC, to be able to really deal with the situation in a way that allows us to continue our pathway to prosperity while addressing the challenges of regional peace and stability. So whether it's the event here, where I'm sure you've been having some very interesting discussions, whether if you see all of the various verticals in Vision 2030, the numbers, great progress, even though we are facing some geostrategic headwinds, geopolitical headwinds in the region. That hasn't thrown us off course. And that, I think, is a very, very positive signal that we have built a maturity, that we've been able to build a maturity into Vision 2030, into the Saudi economy, into the GCC economies as well, that allows us to be able to withstand any side impacts from geopolitics. That, coupled with the very wise policies that the leadership of the kingdom has instituted and we have followed, that has allowed us to really keep the kingdom focused on its developmental path rather than getting drawn into any of these regional conflicts.
Would you then, or would it be fair to suggest that there is a sort of policy of strategic ambiguity or sort of neutrality when it comes to what is going on? And I do want to go on very specifically to the files of Gaza, Lebanon, Iran, and I know we'll talk about the efforts that you have been making behind the scenes to ensure that there is a solution at the back end of this. But how would you just describe that? Because there will be some who say, you could have, the Gulf countries might have done more earlier to try and effect some sort of change.
Well, I will say on the kingdom's part, we have been anything but ambiguous. We have been quite categorical. We called, in the instance of Gaza, for instance, for a ceasefire from the very beginning. We were very clear that even with the horrors of October 7th, that an overreaction by Israel was extremely dangerous. And we have seen the reality that Israel's reaction and its continuing military assault in Gaza has led to a humanitarian catastrophe that has not only impacted the citizens of Gaza, that has not only resulted in tens of thousands of unjustifiable civilian deaths, it's also really put a huge question mark on the international systems of rules and governance, on the legitimacy of international humanitarian law, international law, and its applicability in ways that have been really ununiform. So we've said that from the beginning, so we have been very unambiguous about it. We will continue to engage. We engaged from the beginning as well on trying to find pathways out of the conflict. We have the group, the Arab League OIC contact group, but we also had a group of Arab states that had engaged with the United States and others to try and find ways to reach a potential ceasefire, supporting, of course, the efforts of the US, Qatar, and Egypt, and others. So ambiguity is not what we, in the Kingdom, practice. We practice a very clear foreign policy based on clear guiding principles, but also, of course, from a prospect of not being drawn into confrontation in any way.
And I think, that most people would absolutely agree that there has been a significant effort on the part of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to try and effect a solution here, and a solution that has a pathway to an independent Palestinian state and the end of the occupation by Israel. You have described Israel's assault on Gaza as genocide, and you've talked about Israel having to face consequences. What do you mean very specifically by that?
I mean, if we look just what's happening now in northern Gaza, where we have a complete blockade of any access for humanitarian goods, coupled with a continuing military assault, without any real pathways for civilians to find shelter or to find safe zones, that can only be described as a form of genocide. It is certainly against humanitarian law, international humanitarian law, and that is feeding a continuing cycle of violence, because this level of destruction, this level of really devaluing of human lives, of the lives of ordinary Palestinians, will feed a cycle that is against everybody's interest. And that's why we are trying to focus, even in this very difficult time, on a better future. And that's why we have focused on the issue of a two-state solution, of building a Palestinian state. I will say that while we talk about a two-state solution, the reality is the state of Israel exists. So now it's about establishing the state of Palestine and ensuring that the Palestinians can reach a place where they receive their right to self-determination. And that's our focus, because, again, similar to Vision 2030, similar to what we're trying to do for Saudi Arabia, we want to look at this region from a positive side point. And that means we want to look to the future. We want to look towards a future that is stable, that is safe, where everybody can work with each other, where we can all cooperate with each other. And that's why we're focused on trying to find not just an end to the immediate conflict, but to also work towards making sure that we do not get drawn into repeats of where we are today.
A couple of questions on that. In a speech on Monday, and you're right to point out there are, as we speak, ongoing discussions again about trying to find or at least get agreement on a proposal for a ceasefire deal, not just for Gaza, by the way, for Lebanon, of course, as well. And we'll get to Lebanon in a moment. But in the speech on Monday, the Israeli Prime Minister made no mention of a need to end the war in Gaza, no talk of any, quote, day after plans, no mention of the Palestinians. Now, you have been, and just this week with the meeting here in Riyadh, hoping to get some concrete steps that would, as we say, create this pathway to a Palestinian state or an independent Palestinian state. How concerned are you when you hear no mention of the Palestinians, nor any mention of the day after by the current Israeli Prime Minister. What does that suggest to you? And when we talk about a pathway, what does that specifically mean?
I'm, of course, incredibly concerned because that tells me that there is a real lack of understanding of the strategic reality. We are here in this region. We are stuck in this region, all of us, the Palestinians, everybody, and we're going to have to find a way to live with each other. And we can only live with each other if we address the rights of the Palestinians, if we address the issues of injustice that the Palestinians face right now, and that is going to have to be a serious discussion. If that's not going to happen, we are setting ourselves for a continuing cycle of violence that serves no one except the extremists. What does a pathway to a Palestinian state mean? That means many things, and that's why we have this new, that's why we, with the European Union, Norway, and our colleagues in the Arab League and OIC launched this coalition for a two-state solution, because we realized that, just as you said, that perhaps in Israel, unfortunately, the conversation right now isn't addressing the reality that there's going to have to be a two-state solution. The rest of the international community seems to be fully committed to that. Now we need to translate that commitment into concrete steps. That's going to include capacity and building of state institutions within the Palestinian territories. It will also mean that we have to build on the existing international law that supports the establishment of a Palestinian state. From our perspective, of course, Palestine should become a member of the United Nations without delay. All of these issues are things we want to work on. So there are elements of Palestinian statehood that are tied, obviously, to a negotiation between the Palestinians and Israel, the settlement of borders, things like that. But in reality, the establishment of a Palestinian state is not tied to whether or not Israel accepts it. It's tied to the principles of international law. And I will say that the United Nations resolutions that led to the establishment of the State of Israel clearly had a Palestinian state in view as well. So we need to make that happen.
What you have made clear is that any normalization deal with Israel would need, before it was a reality, you would need to see at least a viable pathway towards a Palestinian state. So a couple of questions to you. Will a verbal commitment from Benjamin Netanyahu suffice? Were you to get on a sort of, on a pathway that you felt was worth sort of tabling for an independent state? And if not, what specific measures does Saudi need to see to move forward? And what is Saudi Arabia's message to Benjamin Netanyahu? Is normalization with Israel at genuine risk should you not see this commitment from Israel?
I would say certainly normalization with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is not just at risk, it is off the table until we have a resolution to Palestinian statehood. But I would say more than that. I would say that it is not just the issue of normalization with the kingdom that is at risk. I would say that the security of the region as a whole is at risk if we do not address the rights of the Palestinians, if we do not find our way to a pathway that leads us to a Palestinian state, because that's the only way we can ensure that we can focus on the future, that we can focus on cooperation, that we can focus on integration. So I would hope that the leadership of Israel sees that it is not just the right thing to do, it is not just the moral thing to do, it's not just the just thing to do to give the Palestinians their rights and their state. It is also in the security and strategic interest of Israel to do so. And that's, I think, up to them to decide.
Let's talk about Lebanon, if we can, and thank you for being very clear. Before I talk about Lebanon, in fact, let me just ask you one very specific question, both on Gaza and on Lebanon, as I've suggested. There is some effort being made to try and find a deal at this point, albeit temporary, on both sides, both for Gaza and for Lebanon. Both of the conversations, discussions seem to be about a sort of temporary, month-long ceasefire at this point. Certainly the Lebanese Prime Minister is optimistic. He says that that deal for Lebanon could come in the hours, if not days, to come. Do you share his optimism, and how do you feel about any progress being made for Gaza at this point?
Yeah. I would say I hope it's the case that we can see a ceasefire in the immediate hours, in the immediate short term. I am not sure that that's the case. I don't have the details. We are not part of the direct negotiations that are going on. We certainly support the effort that the US is undertaking to find a pathway to a ceasefire. I hope it comes to fruition. It's the same for Gaza. We have had, unfortunately, many false starts, many pronouncements of a near deal for a ceasefire in Gaza, only to be disappointed. And my understanding is that we have in most of those instances where the talks eventually collapsed, it has been because there have been new requirements or new demands added on the part of Israel. I hope that at this point we can finally reach a ceasefire that spares what is left of Gaza, the people of Gaza, and gives them an opportunity to finally see some peace.
I've just seen a statistic that every 4 days a child is dying in Lebanon at present as well. So clearly, an enormous effort needed to try and find a solution there. What needs to happen in Lebanon for Saudi to re-engage more than just on the humanitarian side, which I think we must absolutely acknowledge you are involved with the air bridge setup. But what needs to happen for Saudi Arabia to sort of officially re-engage and provide the sort of support Lebanon has seen from the kingdom in the past?
I mean, we have always been engaged in some forms with Lebanon. We have never fully disengaged, but of course, we continue to have the view that it is up to the Lebanese and Lebanese politicians to seek a direction that puts Lebanon on the right track. It's not up to any outside influence, any outside countries, any outside powers to tell the Lebanese what to do or to influence the political process in Lebanon. That is our opinion. So we engage with our friends in Lebanon, but we are, again, it is up to the Lebanese. We have the presidency that continues to be unresolved. We have a government structure that is not really conducive to good governance. We have issues beyond that of corruption, etc. We have issues of outside parties dominating the scene. All of that needs to be addressed by the Lebanese. And if we see a sense that that is really on the cards and that we can move forward, certainly that would encourage us to come in and be more engaged.
And inside parties, of course, still playing a role and influencing politics, and by which I'm talking about Hezbollah as a political party. Are you prepared as the kingdom to be better engaged going forward and significantly engaged in order to help Lebanon on the sort of road to recovery, with Hezbollah still involved in politics, if not as the sort of strategic militant group that it has been in the past?
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, it's up to the Lebanese, as I said. I'm not going to right now discuss what exactly the shape of Lebanon should be, because it's up to the Lebanese to decide. Whatever we see from that is going to inform our judgments as how much we can engage, how much we can work with Lebanon, how much we can facilitate progress in areas there.
Do you see any signs that Iran is putting pressure on its Lebanese ally Hezbollah to accept a truce? You have decent contacts now with the Iranians. So I'm just wondering what your sort of understanding is.
I mean, I certainly hope that Iran, like us, is working towards regional de-escalation on all fronts, not just in Lebanon. And that's very much the focus of our conversations, my conversations with my Iranian counterpart. What I hear from the Iranians is that they are indeed very much keyed into the fact that a continuing of the cycle of escalation is not in their interest. I do hope that they are translating that into actually practical steps.
Well, let's talk about Iran. Are you confident that Israel's recent retaliatory strike on these selected military sites in Iran signals the end of what has been this face-off that otherwise threatens to plunge this region into further chaos?
Am I confident? I cannot be confident of anything that is in the control of other parties, other actors. But what I can say is that I have made it clear to our Iranian counterparts that it is important that we avoid any further escalation. My sense is that at least on their side, that they realize the risks of escalation and would prefer to avoid it. But of course, they have their own strategic calculations that they're going to have to take. And that means that it's not just up to one party to de-escalate. Really, the only way for us to find a pathway to de-escalate all of what's going on in the region is for everybody to make a conscious decision that further escalation is dangerous, is risky for all parties. So that will also mean Israel will need to de-escalate. It will also mean that our partners in the international community will need to redouble their efforts, that we focus on de-escalating all of these issues. And of course, loaded on all of that is the issue in Gaza. Without finding a pathway to a ceasefire in Gaza, I think we continue to risk intended and unintended cycles of escalation.
Well, to that end, and with this sort of, and again, through the lens of sort of 2030 and the idea of navigating a new Middle East, navigating a new architecture in this region, getting to a point where the region can leave conflict behind, look towards a brighter future with economic integration and de-escalation. We have seen Iran and Saudi Arabia come to this rapprochement mediated by the Chinese. How would you then describe what some 14, 15 months on, how would you describe the kingdom's relations with Iran at present?
I think our relations are moving in the right direction, but of course they are complicated by the issues of regional dynamics. Certainly we have very, very honest and transparent conversations with each other that help in understanding each other's points of view and that ensure that there are no misunderstandings. And I think based on that direct communication, we are able to slowly build in the direction of a much more stable and strong relationship that can serve the interests not just of our two countries, but of regional stability. And we're doing that very much in concert and coordination also with our GCC allies.
Is it the view of the kingdom that the regime in Tehran will fundamentally change anytime soon? Or is this rather a policy of keep your friends close and your enemies closer at this point?
I mean, how Iran governs itself is really up to Iran and the Iranian people. That's, I don't have an opinion on that at all. What matters to me is regional policies and policies that impact my direct interests. And in that case, certainly the conversations we are having indicate that we can reach a certain point where we are cognizant of each other's interests, cognizant of each other's concerns, and making sure that there are no misunderstandings that could lead to any form of risk for both.
That I understand. The reason I ask, of course, is that the bottom line is that for years Iran has been the biggest threat to Saudi Arabia's security. We've heard it said time and again. So I just wonder at this point, how big a threat does Saudi still see in or from Iran? And at this point, is this a case of implied threat, direct threat at this point? I mean, have you been in conversation with Tehran about whether or not, a continued escalation could put Saudi's security at risk? Has there been a direct threat from the Iranians?
Certainly there have not been any threats, but the issue that we've had and that we can, that was the basis for, let's say, the divergence in our relationship was the fact that that Iran's regional behavior, from our perspective, was not conducive to stability. And that's something where we are having very, very clear and honest conversations with the Iranians, was part of the conversations in Beijing. And I think we are having those conversations in a way that can ensure that we are moving in the right direction.
Is it more than conversations at this point? There have been reports of more than one military exercise between Iran and Saudi Arabia in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Oman. Is there any truth in that?
There haven't been any military exercises, and I think given the current regional context, it's unlikely that there are going to be exercises in the near term.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. Because I did wonder whether if those had been going on, how those might have been seen in Washington. You've just told me they haven't, so I'll rest my case on that one and move on to US-Saudi relations, if that's okay. We've discussed the critical importance of regional stability and security through the lens of Vision 2030, which I think, I hope you would agree with me in saying it's an unapologetic Saudi-first policy. Many countries around the world, many very successful countries, most successful countries, have a first policy. America first, wherever it is around the world, and this is a Saudi first policy, putting your sovereign interests and national security squarely at the front of your thinking. For years, there has been a sense of disillusionment in this region about the reliability of the US as a guarantor of security. So let me just start there. In 2024, as we sit here today, does the Kingdom believe the US is a reliable partner?
Certainly, we have had a very important and beneficial strategic partnership with the US, both economically and from a geostrategic and security perspective for many decades. And I would say that today that the working relationship with the US is among the best we've ever had, including in the national security space, but also in issues of economic cooperation, and we're making very, very good progress. It's of course the case that the region is very different today than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. The Kingdom is very different than it was 20, 30 years ago, and that means the dynamics are somewhat different. It doesn't mean that there is a change in the relationship per se. It just means that we are working together very, very differently. And it also means that we are playing a bigger role in our own national security interests. It also means that we are much more active in diverse partnerships rather than focused on one partnership. All of that is a function of the growth that the Kingdom has shown, that the Kingdom has seen. The growing geostrategic relevance of the region is actually one of the kind of surprising things, perhaps, that some theorists might notice, that although some years ago there was kind of this idea that our part of the world would decrease in geostrategic relevance, it's actually the opposite. It has just gained, because we are not only continuing to be an important supplier of energy in the traditional energy forms and a source of energy security, but we are also proving to be a critical hub for many of the future technologies, whether it's renewable energy, solar, etc., or digital technologies, AI, data centers, because of not just because of the cheap energy that we can produce from renewables, but also because of our geographic location, which means we're one of the best places for access. So the relevance of our region, and certainly of the Kingdom, has increased, and that has meant that we have had, because of our policy of putting our interests first, which I think it would be odd if somebody didn't do that, focused on diversifying our partnerships as much as possible.
And it hasn't gone unnoticed that in a changing global growth paradigm and dynamic, there is significant growth here in this region. And I think that's well acknowledged around the world. Maybe people are a little bit slow to catch up with that. And also, of course, incredible capital heft as well. Let's stick with this US relationship and how it's developing, because you still don't have the defense deal, but these days this is a defense plus deal, which I think very much speaks to your point about the growth and power and opportunity that there is here. Part of this deal, this bilateral deal, is about a civil nuclear program. Much of this is about trade. It's about investment, Saudi investment in the US and US investment here. That deal is not yet signed. We keep hearing that this deal is close. Is the Kingdom on a promise that a deal will be done before the end of this administration?
I mean, the bilateral agreements we are working on with the US are actually multiple agreements. Some of them we can progress probably quite quickly, and some of them we are working on, especially those related to trade, AI, etc., and which are not tied to any other third parties, let's say. Some of the more significant defense cooperation agreements are more complicated. We would certainly welcome an opportunity to finish them before the current administration's term, but that's reliant on other factors outside of our control. And in the end, if we reach them, that's fine. If we don't, we have a very, very strong working relationship with the US, even on defense cooperation as it exists.
Let me
serves
pressure
both of us well.
Because we know that Washington wants normalization bolted onto any sort of broad deal. Is that realistic at this point? And are you prepared to walk away from some of this sort of bilateral deal content if you say, and you can't see normalization as an option from the Saudi perspective at the moment?
There's one element of the bilateral agreements that we're working on that is very much tied to normalization, and we've made very clear, the Crown Prince in his speech to the Shura Council made very clear what would be required for the kingdom to establish diplomatic relations with Israel, and absent that, we are quite happy to wait until the situation is amenable. The other work streams are not that connected, and some of them are progressing quite quickly, and we hope to see moving forward.
And we'll keep an eye on those. Yeah. I've got one more question for you. It's probably going to be two, but it's broadly one more question because it's about the US elections. Just days to go before the US election. I mean, literally just hours to go now. Is it clear to you which candidate would be the best for the Middle East in general, in particular for solving the Israel-Palestine conflict? And do you have a candidate that better understands the opportunities afforded by Saudi Vision 2030, and who would Saudi prepare to work with?
We are quite prepared to work with either administration or either candidate should they gain the trust of the American people. It's really up to the American people to decide who is the next president. And we've done well historically with both Democratic and Republican administrations. Obviously, we've worked with President Trump before, so we know, we know him, and we can find a way to work with him very well. But we also know, obviously, the team that is currently working with the Biden administration, and Vice President Harris is part of that team, and we've been able to build a very strong working relationship. So we absolutely have no preference. They will certainly be different. Whether one or the other would be better, this is not up to me to say.
You haven't been in this business as long as you have, not to be the consummate diplomat, and you absolutely are. Donald Trump claims he is capable of bringing peace to this region. Sir, yes or no, is he right?
I certainly hope if the American people choose to elect him president that he brings peace to the region.
And with that, I leave it there. Foreign Minister.
Thank you.
Your Highness, thank you.
Thank you very much.